I've been a park ranger in the Appalachian backcountry for over 15 years now, stationed out near the winding shores of one of those forgotten lakes, the West Virginia hills. It's a job that suits a man like me, solitary, methodical, with long stretches of quiet broken only by the occasional hiker or fisherman who strays too far from the marked trails. The landscape here is unforgiving, all dense forests of oak and hickory that swallow the sunlight, and valleys where the mist hangs low like a perpetual shroud. In the fall, when the leaves turn to fire and then crumble to dust, the air takes on a crisp edge that bites at your skin, reminding you how small you are against the vastness of these mountains. I've seen my share of oddities out here. Lost campers, poached deer, even the remnants of old moonshine stills hidden in the underbrush, but nothing that ever made me question my sanity until that one foggy autumn evening a few years back. It started like any other shift. I'd wrapped up the day's paperwork at the ranger station, a squat little building perched on a ridge overlooking the lake. The water down there was always moody, reflecting the sky in shades of slate gray, but that day it seemed particularly still, almost unnaturally so. No ripples from fish jumping, no birds skimming the surface. Just a flat, glassy expanse that stretched out toward the horizon, bordered by clusters of remote lake houses. Old cabins rented out seasonally to folks looking for a taste of wilderness without the full commitment. Most were empty by late October, their owners long gone back to the cities, leaving behind echoes of summer barbecues and laughter that faded with the warmth. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, radio, a thermos of black coffee, and headed out for the routine dust patrol. The sun was dipping low, painting the treetops in bruised purples and oranges, and a fog was rolling in from the east, the kind that creeps up slow and thick, muffling sounds and blurring edges. I'd heard the locals talk about it plenty of times down at the general store in town. Old-timers nursing their pipes, spinning yarns about how the mist carried voices from the past, whispers of folks who'd gone missing in these woods. Appalachia, don't forget her dead. One grizzled vet named Harlan used to say, his eyes distant like he was staring into some abyss only he could see. I'd nod politely, chalk it up to mountain folklore, the same way I dismiss tales of feral people living off the grid or ancient curses tied to the land. Superstition, I figured, born from isolation and hard living. But as I drove my truck down the rutted dirt road that snaked along the lakeshore, that fog seemed to press in closer, wrapping around the vehicle like fingers testing for weakness. I parked at the trailhead leading to a cluster of those lake houses, the ones farthest from the main access points. My boots crunched on fallen leaves as I started the foot patrol, the path overgrown with ferns and brambles that tug at my pants legs. The air smelled of damp earth and decaying foliage, that rich, loamy scent that fills your lungs and makes you feel alive, yet somehow watched. Every so often, a twig would snap underfoot, echoing louder than it should in the stillness. I scanned the treeline out of habit, looking for signs of wildlife or unauthorized campfires, but nothing stirred. Not even the usual chorus of crickets or owls to break the silence. It was the kind of quiet that weighs on you, makes your own breathing sound intrusive. As I rounded a bend, the weathered dock came into view, jutting out over the water like a skeletal finger. It belonged to one of the oldest cabins in the area, a sagging structure with peeling paint and a roof patched more times than anyone could count. The boathouse sat at the end of the dock, a small, ramshackle building half claimed by vines, its door hanging slightly askew on rusted hinges. I passed it 100 times before without a second thought, but that evening, something fell off. The door was cracked open just a sliver, enough to suggest it hadn't been that way for long. Maybe wind, I told myself, though there wasn't a breeze to speak of. Or perhaps some animal had nosed its way in, a raccoon or possum scavenging for scraps. I paused at the dock's edge, listening. The fog had thickened, reducing visibility to maybe 20 feet, turning the lake into a hazy void. My radio crackled faintly on my belt, but no calls came through, just static like distant thunder rumbling far off. I called out, my voice flat and authoritative. "This is Ranger Ellis. Anyone in there?" The words hung in the air for a moment before the mist swallowed them whole. No response, not even an echo off the water. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting a narrow path through the gloom, illuminating droplets of moisture suspended like tiny jewels. Stepping onto the dock, each plank groaned under my weight, protesting with creaks that sounded almost human, like muffled cries. The wood was slick with condensation, and I had to steady myself against the railing, feeling the rough splinters bite into my palm. As I neared the boathouse door, the air grew heavier, laced with that familiar damp wood smell, but undercut by something else, metallic, sharp, like the tang of blood from a fresh cut. It hit me in the back of the throat, making my stomach twist. I pushed the door open wider with my boot, the hinges squealing in resistance, and shone the light inside. The interior was a clutter of forgotten relics. Old life jackets hanging limp on hooks, coils of frayed rope, a rusted tackle box spilling its contents onto the floor. But what caught my eye were the walls, planks scarred with deep gouges, long parallel scratches that ran from chest height down to the baseboards. They looked fresh, the wood fibers still pale and splintered, as if made by nails or claws digging in desperation. I knelt down, running my fingers over one set, feeling the roughness, imagining the force it would take to carve that deep. Animal, maybe a bear trapped inside once, panicking. But bears didn't leave marks so precise, so frantic. That's when I heard it. A low whisper, soft and indistinct, like wind through reeds, but with a cadence that suggested words. It started faint, bubbling up from somewhere below, through the cracks in the floorboards where the lake water lapped gently against the pilings. I froze, every muscle tensing, straining to make sense of it. Names? It sounded like names, murmured in a child's voice, high-pitched, innocent, but laced with an undercurrent of sorrow. Emily, Jacob, over and over, repeating like a broken record, echoing faintly from the water itself. My heart hammered in my chest, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead despite the chill. I swept the flashlight around, beam trembling slightly, but the boathouse was empty. No one there, just shadows dancing in the corners, elongated by the light. I backed up a step, the whisper growing clearer, more insistent, as if drawing closer. It wasn't coming from the walls or the ceiling. It was rising from beneath, from the dark depths of the lake, pressing up through the gaps. I could almost feel the vibration in the floor, a subtle hum accompanying the voices. Panic clawed at the edges of my mind, but I forced myself to stay calm. Hallucination? Exhaustion from a long day? But no, it was real, too real, the way it cut through the fog in my head. I turned to leave, my boots splashing in a puddle that had formed near the door, and that's when I saw it. A slender figure in the treeline, just beyond the dock's end. Unmoving, silhouetted against the fading light, cloaked in mist. It wasn't close enough to make out features. Could have been a person, or maybe a trick of the shadows. But I felt its gaze, heavy and unwavering, like eyes boring into my soul. I didn't wait. I bolted back along the dock, planks thundering under my hurried steps, the whisper fading behind me, but that stare following, prickling the hairs on my neck all the way to the truck. I slammed the door shut, engine roaring to life, and peeled out onto the road, glancing in the rear view only once. The fog had swallowed the dock entirely, but I swore I saw movement, a shape detaching from the trees, gliding toward the water. That night, back at my cabin, a modest place higher up the ridge, I couldn't shake it. Sleep evaded me, the whispers replaying in my mind like a loop. Come morning, with the sun burning off the mist and the world feeling solid again, I headed to the station's archives. We kept records of incidents going back decades, yellowed files stuffed in metal cabinets. It didn't take long to find it. A report from 12 years prior, a family vacation at that very lake house gone horribly wrong. Parents and 2 kids, Emily and Jacob, ages 8 and 10, out on the boat during a sudden fog bank. Capsized. Search teams dragged the lake for days, but no bodies recovered. Just debris washing up on shore and whispers from divers about strange currents pulling them down. The file included statements from witnesses. Locals who claim to hear cries echoing across the water on foggy nights, names carried on the wind. I closed the folder, a chill settling deep in my bones. Was it guilt? Echoes of trauma imprinted on the land? Or something more primal? The mountains holding onto their lost like jealous guardians? I requested a transfer to patrols on the other side of the park after that, avoiding that stretch of shore whenever possible. But even now, on quiet nights when the fog rolls in, I catch myself listening. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear them. Those whispers, soft and pleading, calling names from a place where the living aren't meant to tread. It makes me wonder if one day they'll call mine. The days blurred after that encounter, each patrol laced with a newfound wariness. I'd find myself hesitating at trailheads, scanning the underbrush for shapes that didn't belong. The other rangers noticed, asked if I was all right, if the isolation was getting to me. I brushed it off with jokes about too much coffee, but inside, the memory festered like an open wound. I started researching more, digging into old Appalachian legends during my off hours. Tales of water babies or spirits of the drowned, entities that lured the unwary with voices mimicking loved ones. Grounded stuff rooted in real tragedies, floods, mining accidents, disappearances that left families shattered. But nothing prepared me for the return visits. A week later, duty pulled me back near the lake. Not to the dock, thank God, but close enough that the water's edge taunted me from afar. The fog was absent that day, the lake sparkling under a rare clear sky. But as I hiked a parallel trail, I heard it again, a faint murmur carried on a breeze that shouldn't have been there. Names, the same ones. Emily, Jacob, whispered so softly I could almost convince myself it was the wind through the leaves. I stopped dead, heart racing, and peered toward the boathouse in the distance. Nothing visible, but that metallic scent wafted over, faint but unmistakable. I radioed in early, claiming a headache, and drove home with the windows up, music blaring to drown out the silence. Nights became the worst. My cabin, once a sanctuary, felt exposed. I'd wake in the small hours, sweat-soaked, convinced I'd heard scratching at the door. Those same gouges from the boathouse, etched into my dreams. I took to sleeping with the light on, a habit I hadn't had since childhood. And the figure? It haunted my thoughts, that slender outline in the fog. Was it one of the parents, watching eternally? Or something else, a manifestation of the lake's hunger? I confided in Harlan one evening over beers at the store, his eyes lighting up with grim recognition. "The hills remember," he muttered. "They hold grudges longer than men." He shared his own story, a cousin lost to the woods years back, whispers drawing him deeper until he vanished. No body, just echoes. I tried to move on, burying myself in work. But the lake called me back, inevitably. During a storm watch 2 months later, heavy rain swelling the waters, I had no choice but to check the flood-prone areas, including that cursed dock. The path was mud-slick, rain pounding like accusations, flashlight beam diffused by sheets of water. As I approached, the boathouse door swung open in the wind, banging rhythmically. Inside, the scratches seemed deeper, fresh rivulets of water tracing them like tears. And the whispers, louder now, urgent, bubbling up with the rising lake. I shone the light down through the cracks, half expecting to see faces staring back from the black depths. That's when the figure appeared again, not in the treeline, but closer, at the dock's edge, rain sluicing off its form. Slender, hooded perhaps, but unmoving amid the torrent. I yelled, voice lost in the gale, but it didn't flinch. Instead, it raised an arm, pointing toward the water, as if inviting me in. Terror gripped me, pure and primal, and I ran, slipping in the mud, scraping my knees bloody. Back in the truck, gasping, I glanced in the mirror. Nothing there. But the whispers followed, seeping through the vents, murmuring my name now, intertwined with the children's. I reported it vaguely as vandalism, the scratches blamed on animals. No one questioned it. These mountains breed skepticism toward the uncanny. But I know what I experienced. The lake holds secrets, tragedies that don't rest easy. I still patrol, but never alone near that shore. And on foggy evenings, when the mist creeps in, I stay inside, doors locked, listening to the wind. Because sometimes, in the quiet, those voices rise again. Whispers from the Misty Dock, calling from a place where the drowned wait, patient and unrelenting. One day, I fear they might pull me under too. I've worked as a park ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for going on 18 years now, long enough that most folks in the little towns down the mountain know my truck by sight and wave when I pass. Summers here are thick and green, the kind of humid that sticks to your skin like guilt, and the cicadas scream so loud you can't hear yourself think. That particular afternoon in late July, the air felt heavier than usual, like the forest was holding its breath. Dispatch crackled over the radio about a possible trespasser at one of the old seasonal lake houses on the south arm of the reservoir, a place we call Widow's Reach because the water keeps taking more of the bank every year. Folks rent those cabins for fishing or hiding from the world, but that one had sat empty for decades. Nobody wanted it after what happened. I knew the stories, same as everyone. Back in the summer of '89, a young couple from Charleston, Sarah and Daniel Whitlock, disappeared while staying there on their honeymoon. Boat overturned in a freak squall, bodies never found. Locals said the porch swing kept moving long after the search was called off, creaking back and forth like someone was still sitting in it, waiting for the other to come back from the water. Mountain talk, I told myself. Grief does strange things to people, and grief echoes louder in these hollows. The dirt access road was washed out in places, so I left the truck a half-mile back and walked in. The forest closed behind me quick, hemlocks and rhododendron so thick the sunlight barely touched the ground. Everything smelled of wet earth and slow rot, the kind of smell that gets into your clothes and stays for days. Mosquitoes whined around my ears, and every step squelched in the mud. When the cabin finally came into view, it looked like the lake was trying to swallow it whole. The lower third of the foundation had sunk years ago, and dark water lapped at the support beams beneath the porch like a dog worrying a bone. The swing hung from rusty chains on the far end, swaying just enough to make that familiar, lazy creak carry across the stillness. I stopped and listened. Creak, 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 steady as a heartbeat. There wasn't a breath of wind. The surface of the lake lay flat and dull, reflecting the bruised green sky. I told myself it was the heat making the chains expand and contract, or maybe a slow drip from the eaves setting it off. But my stomach nodded all the same. I called out the standard warning. Park service. Anybody on the premises? My voice sounded small, swallowed by the trees. Nothing answered except that swing. I stepped onto the warped porch boards, boots thudding soft, and the creaking stopped the instant my weight settled. Dead silence rushed in to fill the space, so complete I could hear the blood in my ears. The cushions on the swing were soaked through, darker patches shaped like small handprints and the curve of a hip like someone had been sitting there minutes ago and vanished when I arrived. That's when I noticed the footprints. Bare feet, narrow, starting at the bottom step and walking straight into the lake. The prints were fresh. Water still seeped into the indentations. Child-sized, or maybe a slight woman. They disappeared about 10 feet out where the bottom dropped off. I followed them without thinking, the way you do when something feels wrong in your gut, and you have to know. The shallows were warm on top, but cold underneath, like the lake kept two temperatures. Mud sucked at my boots with every step, trying to hold me. Dragonflies hovered, iridescent in the heavy light, and the smell of algae and old decay thickened until I could taste it. I was knee-deep when something brushed my leg. Not a fish, not a stick, something deliberate, cold fingers trailing across my calf like testing the temperature of meat. I jerked back hard, nearly lost my balance, and swung the flashlight down even though the sun was still up. The beam just scattered in the murk. Nothing there, but the water around my legs rippled outward in perfect circles, as if something had just let go and sunk. Then the laughter came. It drifted from inside the house, faint and muffled, like it was traveling through walls and years. A woman's laugh first, light and surprised, the kind you make when someone you love whispers something sweet in your ear. Then a man's deeper chuckle joining in, warm, private. For one heartbeat, it sounded so real, I almost smiled, until I realized the quality was wrong. Tinny, stretched, the way voices sound when played on an old tape left in the sun too long. The laughter cut off mid-note, sharp as a slammed door. I scrambled back to the porch, heart hammering against my ribs, water streaming from my pants. The swing was moving again, faster now, chains squealing. The wet cushions had fresh indentations, deeper this time, as though weight had settled and then risen. I could almost see the outline of two bodies side by side, hip to hip, the way honeymooners sit when the world is brand new. I should have left then. Every instinct told me to get back to the truck, radio it in as vandalism or kids messing around, anything to put official words on it and be done. But I've never been good at walking away from unanswered questions, and that's probably why I still wake up at 3 a.m. hearing that creak. I went inside. The screen door hung loose on one hinge and side shut behind me. The living room smelled of mildew and old smoke, the kind that clings to curtains long after the fire's gone out. Furniture sat under dusty sheets like crouched ghosts. Sunlight filtered through grimy windows and slanted bars, catching motes of dust that drifted slow, like they had nowhere to be. On the coffee table lay a single Polaroid, half-curled from damp. The couple from '89, arms around each other on that very swing, lake sparkling behind them, both of them laughing at something just out of frame. I picked it up. On the white border, someone had written in faded ink, "We'll never leave this place." A floorboard creaked overhead. I froze. The cabin was one story. There was no upstairs. The sound came again, deliberate, directly above where I stood, like bare feet pacing the length of the room that shouldn't exist. Then the soft drag of the swing chains outside, keeping perfect time. Creak, step. I backed toward the door, not turning, afraid to take my eyes off the ceiling. Dust sifted down in a thin rain where the footsteps passed. I made it to the porch just as the laughter returned, louder now, spilling from every room at once. It wasn't joyful anymore. It was the sound you make when you're trying not to cry and failing, when the joke has gone on too long and you realize you're the punchline. The swing rocked violently, chains shrieking, though the cushions still showed only those two perfect indentations. I ran. Mud grabbed at my boots the whole way back to the truck, brambles tearing at my sleeves like they wanted to keep me. Behind me, the creaking never stopped, steady as a metronome, chasing me through the trees. When I finally slammed the door and looked back, the cabin was just a gray shape half lost in green, but the swing was still moving back and forth, long after I was gone. That night, I pulled the file. Sarah Whitlock, 24. Daniel Whitlock, 27. Overturned aluminum fishing boat found floating upside down 2 days after the storm. Life jackets still clipped inside. No sign of struggle, no blood. Just an empty boat and a porch swing that wouldn't stay still. Searchers reported hearing laughter on the water at night. Faint, always moving away when they got close. They wrote it off as wind. I started avoiding Widow's Reach after that. Reassigned myself to the northern districts, told my supervisor the mosquitoes were worse down south. But the lake is big, and duty is duty. 6 months later, a hiker reported seeing lights in that same cabin at dusk. I volunteered someone else. I still hear it sometimes, though. Late summer nights when the air is thick and the windows are open, that creek drifts up the hollow, patient as regret. And underneath it, almost too soft to catch, the murmur of two voices talking low, like they're making plans they'll never keep. I close the windows, turn on every light, pour a drink I don't taste. Because some echoes don't fade. Some promises made on a sinking porch swing are stronger than death, and the water always remembers what it's taken. I keep that Polaroid in my locker at the station. Every time I open the door, their smiling faces stare back, young and untouched by what came after. And every time, I swear the woman's head is turned a fraction more toward the camera, like she's trying to tell me something she never got the chance to say. The swing is still moving. I know it is. And one of these nights when the moon is new and the lake goes mirror still, I'm afraid I'll walk down there just to make it stop. Just to sit for a minute and listen to whatever they're trying to say. Maybe that's what they're waiting for. Someone who'll finally stay. I've been a ranger in the Allegheny Plateau for 22 seasons, long enough to know every hollow by the taste of its air and every ridge by the ache it puts in my knees. Fall is the cruelest time up here. The leaves bleed out in slow motion. The mornings come in cold and wet, and the fog settles into the valleys like it's paid rent. Most folks think the danger is bears or copperheads or the drop-offs no trail map warns you about. But the real threat is subtler. It's the way the mountains watch you back when you think you're alone. That October, Dispatch sent me to check a string of seasonal cabins along the upper reservoir, the ones reachable only by a jeep track that turns to soup after the first hard rain. Someone had reported broken windows and graffiti, though out here someone usually means a fisherman with a grudge or teenagers who drove 3 hours to prove they weren't scared of ghosts. I logged the call, filled a thermos with coffee gone bitter from the pot, and started the slow crawl down the switchbacks. The higher I went, the thicker the mist became, until the treetops disappeared and the road felt like a tunnel bored through cloud. The oldest cabin sat at the end of the line, a squat 2-story built in the 30s when the TVA flooded the valley and made the lake. Locals call it the glass house because every room has a window facing water, and because nobody who stays more than a night ever feels alone. I'd cited it for code violations twice, but the owner lived in Florida and didn't care. The trail-in was a half-mile slog through Laurel Hills, so dense you could lose a dog 5 feet off the path. By the time the roofline appeared, my uniform was soaked at the cuffs and the fog had swallowed sound itself. Even my footsteps came back muffled, like the ground was apologizing for letting me pass. The front door was unlocked, which was wrong. These places are supposed to be boarded up after Labor Day. I knocked anyway, 3 sharp raps that should have echoed off the water and didn't. Nothing. I pushed inside, and the air hit me like opening a root cellar. Cold, damp, tasting of iron and turned earth. The floorboard sighed under my weight. Long, mournful notes that lingered too long. Light came in pale rectangles through the windows, but every pane was fog from the inside. Breath clouded, even though the place had been empty for years. I ran a sleeve across one and left a streak that closed up almost as fast as I made it. I moved room to room with the flashlight off. Daylight was enough, and I didn't want the beam to bounce back at me from all that glass. Living room. Furniture under sheets, coffee table askew, a single mug on the floor with a brown ring dried inside like a fossil. Kitchen. Cabinets hanging open, a mouse-chewed box of saltines, the faint sweet rot smell of something spilled and forgotten. Upstairs hallway, wallpaper curling like birch bark, a child's height marks penciled on the doorframe with dates going back to 1998. I traced the last one with a thumb and felt the groove, still sharp. Someone had stood here not long ago. That was when I saw the movement. It was in the corner of my eye, a flicker at the window beside the stairs. I turned slow, telling myself it was a bird, a leaf, anything ordinary, but the glass showed only fog and my own shape distorted by condensation. Then the fog shifted, and for a heartbeat 2 dark spots resolved, eyes, level with mine, unblinking. They weren't reflected. They were on the outside, looking in. I stepped closer, boots creaking loud in the stillness, and the eyes stayed fixed, patient. When I was an arm's length away, I raised a hand to the pane. The eyes didn't flinch. My palm left a print. Theirs did not. Then the fog swirled, and they were gone, leaving only the slow crawl of condensation closing the gap I'd made. My radio spat static when I thumbed it. Base, this is Unit 4 at Glass House. Need a second set of eyes. Nothing but white noise and the soft pop of distant thunder that never quite arrived. I tried again on the porch, then the yard, but the signal was dead in every direction. The lake lay 30 feet below the back deck, flat and pewter under the mist. Not a ripple to show where shore ended and water began. I stood there a long minute, listening to the cabin settle behind me, boards contracting in the cold like lungs after a scream. Something made me go back in. Under the deck chair, I found the journal wedged between slats, leather cover soft with mold, pages warped but legible. The handwriting started neat and slanted right, then grew frantic, ink bleeding where tears or lake water had fallen. Day 1, beautiful here. Fog every morning like the mountains are breathing. Windows sweat all night. Day 4, heard footsteps on the roof at 3 a.m., thought it was squirrels. No tracks. Day 9, it stands outside the glass after sunrise. Doesn't move, just watches. I wave, it doesn't wave back. Day 12, dreamed it was inside with me. Woke up and the bedroom window was open. I never open windows. Day 15, it knows my name. The last entry was a single line scrawled sideways across the page. Pressure so hard the pen tore through. Don't look too long or it looks back forever. I closed the book and felt the temperature drop, though the fog outside hadn't moved. When I turned, the shadow was at the sliding door, closer than before, a tall silhouette pressed to the glass, as if leaning in to listen. The condensation around it beaded and ran in rivulets, outlining shoulders, a head tilted slightly, the suggestion of long hair plastered wet to the skull. I couldn't see a face, only the void where one should be, but I felt the attention settle on me, like a hand on the back of my neck. I backed away until the kitchen island hit my hips, journal clutched to my chest. The figure didn't follow, just stayed at the door, patient, waiting. I told myself to breathe, to catalog details the way they train us. Height roughly 6 feet, posture relaxed, no visible clothing. But the details slipped. Every time I tried to focus, the shape smeared at the edges like wet ink. My pulse hammered so loud I was sure it could hear. I made the front door, slow, not running. Running feels like prey. The floorboards betrayed every step, groaning in sequence like they were counting. Halfway across the living room, I risked a glance back. The silhouette had moved to the side window, tracking me without hurry. Another step, and it was at the next pane, always the same distance, always outside the glass. I reached the door, fumbled the knob, slick with my own sweat, and stumbled onto the porch. The fog had thickened while I was inside. I couldn't see the lake anymore, only the suggestion of water somewhere below the railing. I started down the path, boots sliding on wet leaves, and that's when I heard it. The softest scrape like a fingernail drawn once across glass. I didn't look back. I couldn't, but I felt it behind me, matching pace, silent except for that occasional drag that might have been imagination and might not. The trail twisted through rhododendron, so dense the branches formed a tunnel. Every dozen yards I caught a glimpse between leaves, pale shape, keeping parallel, never quite in the open, never quite gone. My breath sawed in and out, fogging and clearing. I told myself if I reached the Jeep, I'd be safe, metal, an engine, and miles of road between me and whatever that was. But the path stretched longer than memory, switchbacks multiplying, the same twisted oak appearing again and again like a loop. I don't know how long I walked. Long enough for my legs to cramp, for the cold to numb my fingers around the journal I still carried. When the Jeep finally materialized, gray and dripping, I almost sobbed. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and sat shaking while the engine warmed. In the rearview mirror, the trailhead was empty, just fog and dripping leaves. I laughed once, a crack sound, and put the truck in gear. Halfway up the ridge, the radio woke up. Unit 4, report. You went dark for 42 minutes. 42. I've been gone less than 20 by my watch. I didn't answer. Couldn't. My throat was raw from breathing too hard. Back at the station, I pulled the property file. Last registered occupant. Elias Ward, photographer, rented the glass house for a month in 2011 to document the fall migration. Checked in, never checked out. Boat found drifting, camera on the seat, memory card empty. Case closed, accidental drowning. No mention of a journal, no footprints, no fogged windows. I keep the journal in my locker now. Some nights I take it out and read the last pages again, tracing the tear stains with a thumb. The handwriting never changes, but sometimes there's a new smudge, a fingerprint in dust that wasn't there before. I stopped driving the reservoir road at dawn. I tell the new rangers the signal drops, that the grade's too steep after rain, anything to keep them away. But the glass house is still there, windows, sweating every morning, and the fog still comes in on schedule. Last week, a hiker left a note at the trailhead register. Saw someone standing at the cabin window. They didn't move when I waved. The handwriting was neat, slanted right. I burned the note before anyone else saw it. Sometimes, when a mist creeps up the hollows and the lake goes quiet, I stand at my own kitchen window and watch the glass fog from the outside in. I don't wave. I don't look too long. But I know it's only a matter of time before the condensation beads and runs, before the shape resolves on the other side, patient as stone, waiting for me to blink first. I've spent 27 winters patrolling these mountains, long enough that the cold feels like an old debt the land keeps trying to collect. Most folks think January is quiet in the Appalachians, that everything just sleeps under the snow, but the mountains never truly rest. Water keeps moving beneath the ice, roots keep drinking, and some things that should have frozen solid a long time ago refuse to stay still. That year, the snow came early and heavy, piling so deep the access roads turned to luge runs. By mid-month, the thaw started, warm rain on top of frozen ground, the kind of weather that makes creeks rise overnight and turns basements into cisterns. Dispatch sent me to check a string of summer cabins along the north shore of Laurel Fork Lake, places that hadn't seen a human footprint since October. One house in particular, the old McCreary place, had a history. Built in 1932, half its foundation sat on filled dirt that never settled right. Every big flood took another bite. Locals called it the sinking house and wouldn't fish near it anymore. Said you could hear a child crying under the floorboards when the water got high. I filed that under mountain superstition, same as I filed everything else that couldn't be written up in an incident report. I parked the truck as close as the ruts allowed and hiked the last quarter mile on snowshoes. The sky was the color of a dirty nickel, low clouds pressing down like a lid. Snow sifted off the hemlocks in heavy clumps every time the wind moved high in the canopy, sounding almost like footsteps overhead. By the time the cabin came into view, twilight had already started bleeding the light out of the day. The house looked wounded, roof sagging, porch rails snapped like broken ribs, and the front door hanging open just enough for snow to have drifted across the threshold in a perfect wedge. That door should have been padlocked and boarded. I felt the first tug of wrongness in my gut, the same feeling you get when you realize the woods have gone too quiet around you. I called out anyway. Park service. Anybody inside? My voice fell flat, soaked up by the snow and the waterlogged walls. Nothing answered except the soft hiss of melt dripping off the eaves. I stepped over the drift and into the living room. The air inside was warmer than outside, but wetter, thick with the smell of rotten iron. Furniture sat where it always had. Only now the legs of the couch disappeared into 2 inches of black water that had wicked up through the floorboards. Snowmelt, I told myself. Happens every thaw. But the water was moving, slow, lazy circles that didn't match any drip I could see. The basement door stood ajar at the end of the hall. I've never liked basements in these old houses. They're always half cave, half grave. I swept the flashlight across the stairwell and saw the water had climbed halfway up, lapping at the 7th step like a dog that knows it's not allowed inside. The beam trembled a little in my hand, cold, that's all it was. I started down, each footfall sending out rings that slapped against the walls. The lower I went, the colder it got, the kind of cold that comes from deep underground and doesn't care what month it is topside. On the 10th step, the pacing started. Soft at first, almost lost under the sound of my own breathing. Plink, 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 like bare feet on wet concrete, walking the length of the basement and back. Slow, deliberate, the way a bored kid drags his toes when he's told to stay in his room. I froze. The light shook across the water, picking out floating debris. A child's plastic boat, a work boot bloated and pale, pages from a coloring book swollen into mush. The footsteps didn't pause. They just kept measuring the same invisible line, back and forth, as patient as tide. I told myself it was current, maybe a rat swimming under the surface. I took out the aluminum probe pole we carry for checking ice thickness and lowered it slow. The water was black and depthless. The pole disappeared to my elbow before it touched anything solid. I swept it side to side, and that's when something nudged back, soft resistance like pushing against a waterlogged quilt. Fabric. Definitely fabric. It drifted against the pole and clung there, heavy and deliberate, until I jerked away. The footsteps stopped. For one heartbeat, everything was silent except the drip overhead and my pulse in my ears. Then the pacing resumed, faster now, splashing, agitated. Bubbles rose in a sudden cluster right in front of me, breaking the surface in perfect rhythm. Too short, one long, pause, too short, one long. Over and over. I didn't know Morse code the way some of the old-timers did, but I knew enough to recognize H-E-L-P when it was spelled out in air on black water. I backed up the stairs so fast, I slipped on the 9th step and went down hard, knee cracking against wood. The flashlight spun out of my hand and landed lens up on a dry step, throwing a cone of light that pointed straight down into the dark like an accusation. In that circle I saw it. A small pale hand break the surface, fingers splayed, reaching before the water closed over it again. No splash, just a soft sigh like disappointment. I scrambled the rest of the way up, slammed the basement door, and wedged a kitchen chair under the knob, even though I knew how stupid that was. My knee throbbed, warm blood soaking my pants, but I barely felt it. The house felt different now, watchful. I limped through the rooms, shining the light into corners, looking for anything to explain what I'd just seen. In the back bedroom, I found the photographs scattered across the floor like someone had hurled them in anger. A family of 5 on the dock, summer sunshine, 4 smiles. The youngest, a boy, maybe 6, stood slightly apart, clutching a plastic boat, staring at the camera with eyes too serious for a child. On the back of the largest photo, someone had written in red ink that had bled in the damp. He never came upstairs. I knew the story then, or pieces of it. Spring of 1997, a flash flood while the family was asleep. Water rose so fast the parents barely got the older kids out of bedroom window. The little boy, Caleb, slept in the basement during storms because he was afraid of thunder. They found the parents' bodies 2 miles downstream, tangled in a debris jam. The older sibling survived. Caleb never did. Searchers pumped the basement for days and recovered nothing but his blanket and 1 shoe. I stood there a long time, photos in my shaking hands, listening to the pacing resume below, slower now, almost thoughtful. Plink, plink, plink. Like he'd accepted I wasn't coming back down. I left the house with the chair still wedged under the door and nailed a condemnation notice across the entrance. Wrote it up as structural failure and hazardous flooding. Didn't mention the footsteps, the hand, the bubble spelling out a word no 6-year-old should know. Some things don't belong in official reports. They just belong to the mountain. That was 12 years ago. I retired from active patrol 4 winters back, but I still drive the maintenance roads when the snow gets heavy and the creeks start to rise. Some nights I park on the ridge above the lake and watch the moonlight slide across the water. The cabin is completely gone now, roof collapsed, walls folded in on themselves like a house of cards somebody got tired of. But when the conditions are right, warm rain on deep snow, the lake rising fast, I can hear it from half a mile away. Faint, patient footsteps under the ice, pacing the length of a basement that doesn't exist anymore. I keep Caleb's plastic boat on the dash of my truck. Found it floating near the shore the spring after it happened, paint chipped, 1 decal of a smiling shark half peeled away. Sometimes when I'm parked up there on the ridge, the boat rocks gently even though the heater's off and the windows are rolled up tight. And on the worst nights, when the thaw comes too quick and the water climbs the banks hungry for anything it missed the first time, I swear I hear a small voice through the vents, soft as melting snow. You said you'd come back. I never do. But I sit there until the pacing stops, until the lake settles again, because somebody should keep watch. Somebody should bear witness. And because some promises, even the ones we never meant to make, sink deeper than any house ever could. I've carried the smell of smoke in my nose for 23 years now, and no amount of mountain air ever quite washes it clean. Most rangers will tell you the worst thing you can smell in these woods is a body that's been missed by searchers. But I know different. There's an older scent, patient and hungry, that waits under floorboards and inside stone chimneys for the right set of lungs to remember it. It started on a raw March morning when the redbuds were just thinking about blooming and the ground was still half frozen from winter. Dispatch patched through a faint report from a fisherman out on Summersville Lake. Thin gray smoke rising from the ridge above the North Cove, the one everybody calls Ash Hollow. That cove has been off limits since I was a rookie. The trail's gated, The cabin's condemned after the '93 flood took out half the shoreline. But smoke doesn't care about gates. I loaded my pack the way I always do: flashlight, first aid kit, evidence bags, and the little tin of coffee grounds I chew when I need to stay sharp, then drove the service road until the mud got too deep. After that, it was boot leather and uphill. The forest was waking up slow, bloodroot pushing through leaf litter, trillium unfurling like pale hands, and everywhere the drip, drip, drip of snow melt running off rock. The higher I climbed, the more the air changed. At first, it was just a suggestion, a memory of childhood campfires, pleasant almost. Then it thickened, turned acrid, and settled at the back of my throat like I'd walked into a burn scar that never cooled. The cabin appeared without warning, the way things do when the rhododendron closes ranks behind you. It was bigger than I remembered, 2 stories of chestnut logs gone silver with age, windows still intact because no kid had ever been brave or stupid enough to throw a rock. A single chimney of local stone rose from the roof, and from it curled the thinnest ribbon of smoke, pale against the darker clouds. I stood there a long minute, telling myself it was squatters, kids with a joint and a death wish, anything ordinary. But the smoke smelled wrong, greenwood and something sweeter underneath, almost like pork left too close to the coals. The front door was unlocked. That should have been my first warning. The Park Service padlocked the place years ago, and the hasp was rusted solid. I pushed anyway, and the hinges didn't complain. Inside, the air was warmer than outside by a good 10 degrees, and the smell hit me full force. Charred meat, melted plastic, and the unmistakable bite of kerosene. The living room looked staged, like somebody dusted it that morning. Couch cushions plumped, coffee table centered, even a vase of dried hydrangeas on the mantel that shouldn't have survived 20 winters. Only the fireplace broke the illusion. A fresh pile of ash filled the hearth, still glowing faintly orange along the edges. I crouched and held my hand over it. Heat rose steady and real. Someone had tended that fire within the hour. I called out of habit. "Park Service, identify yourself." My voice sounded small, swallowed by the log walls. Nothing answered except a soft pop from the ashes, like fat rendering. I swept the downstairs rooms quick. Kitchen cupboards bare, except for a single tin of peaches dated 1981. Bathroom sink dry as bone. A child's bedroom with bunk beds made up tight, and a faded teddy bear sitting upright against the pillow, one button I'm missing. Every room smelled faintly of smoke, but the source was always the fireplace, always drawing me back. Upstairs was worse. The staircase groaned like it remembered weight it hadn't carried in decades. On the landing, I found the first scorch marks, black fingers reaching halfway up the wall, as if the fire had tried to climb and been beaten back. At the end of the hall, a pull-down attic ladder hung open, steps slick with soot. I didn't want to go up. Every instinct said, turn around, nail the door shut from the outside, and let the forest take the place. But rangers don't leave mysteries burning. The attic was one long room under the rafters, lit by a single dormer window, filmed with decades of pollen. Trunks lined both walls, lids yawning open, contents spilled like entrails. Letters mostly, hundreds of them, edges curled and brown. I knelt and lifted one at random. The paper crackled like dry leaves. "You think distance forgives blood." The letter began in a woman's careful hand. "You are wrong. We are coming home to settle the debt, and the house will burn before we let you keep what's ours." Another, dated 2 days later. They nailed the doors from outside. We can smell the coal oil through the cracks. The last one I touched was barely legible, ink run from tears or sweat. "If you find this, leave before the smoke finds you. Some fires bank, but never die." I stood too fast and cracked my head on a beam. The pain sharpened everything. The smell, the warmth radiating from below, the way the attic seemed to breathe around me. Then the whispers started. At first I thought it was wind through the eaves, but the sounds had shape. A man's low chuckle, a woman answering, children laughing farther back. The voices layered over one another, close enough that I turned expecting to see someone behind me. Instead, the shadows in the corners lengthened, stretching like flames frozen mid-leap. Heat bloomed sudden and fierce along the floorboards. I felt it through the soles of my boots. The letters at my feet began to curl at the edges, browning as if an invisible blaze licked across them. I stumbled for the ladder. Halfway down the rungs, the temperature jumped again, and the walls took on an orange glow that had no source. Smoke seeped between the floorboards in thin, deliberate tendrils, curling around my ankles like it was tasting me. I hit the hallway running. The whispers followed, rising into argument, then pleading, then a single scream cut short the way a throat closes when the flames finally win. I made it to the living room as the air shimmered with heat. The couch cushions were smoldering now, threads glowing red. The hydrangeas in the vase had turned to ash mid-bloom, petals drifting upward instead of down. I yanked the front door and almost fell outside into air, so cold it burned my lungs. Behind me, the windows glowed soft orange, though no flame showed. I smelled my own hair singeing and realized the back of my jacket was smoking. I ran. The trail back to the truck is a blur of laurel branches whipping my face and the taste of blood in my mouth where I bit my tongue. When I risked a look over my shoulder, smoke poured from the chimney thick and black, rising straight into the still air like a signal fire. Sirens would have been too late. By the time anyone else arrived, the cabin was cold again, windows dark, hearth swept clean. The letters were gone, the bear on the bunk bed sitting exactly as I'd left it, one eye staring at the ceiling. The official report read, "Accidental rekindle from old ember." Insurance called it spontaneous combustion of mouse nests. Nobody asked why my jacket had burn holes in the shape of handprints. I pulled the property records that winter. The original homestead burned in March 1937. Family of 7 locked inside by persons unknown. Kerosene poured under doors and lit at midnight. 2 teenagers escaped through a cellar window and made it to the lake. They were never seen again. Searchers found only a single set of footprints leading into the water and none coming out. The cabin was rebuilt on the same foundation in 1953 by a developer who didn't believe in curses. It changed hands 4 times before the Park Service condemned it. I still drive that ridge some nights when the wind is out of the west. The new growth has closed over the trail, but I know where the clearing used to be. Most times there's nothing but darkness and the smell of damp leaves. But every few years, when the redbuds bloom early and the ground is still cold, I catch it again. That low, sweet char of greenwood and something worse. Sometimes I see a thin ribbon of smoke rising where no chimney stands anymore. And once, only once, I parked and walked in with a flashlight I never turned on. The clearing was empty, the foundation stones barely visible under moss. But the air was warm, and in the center of where the living room used to be sat a perfect circle of fresh ash, still glowing faintly. Around it, 7 sets of footprints burned black into the soil. 5 large, 2 small, all pointed inward. I left before the smoke found me again. These days I keep the windows cracked, even in winter. Some nights I wake to the smell of it drifting through the screens, faint but unmistakable, like someone just struck a match in the next room. I lie there in the dark and listen for whispers that never quite form words, for the soft pop of fat in a fire that burned 80 years before I was born. Because some debts don't die with the debtors. Some fires bank low and wait for new wood, new breath, new lungs to remember them by. And out here in these mountains, memory is the one thing the land never runs short of. I've never liked still water. Give me a creek that babbles over rocks or a river that fights its banks any day. But when a lake goes flat and black under a new moon, it feels like the mountains are holding their breath. The night last August, the air was so thick with heat and pine pitch you could chew it. I was running the midnight patrol along the west arm of Stone Coal Lake, a finger of water so narrow and deep it never quite warms up, even in July. Most of the old rental cabins up there had been empty since the 90s, but every summer a few college kids still found their way in, looking for a place to drink where nobody would bother them. Lights in a boarded-up house usually meant trouble. I had to write up. The call came in just after 1 a.m. A fisherman on the far shore radioed that he kept seeing a glow in the windows of the old Harlan place, the one perched right where the ridge drops straight into the lake. I told him it was probably moonlight on broken glass, but I went anyway. The gravel access road ends half a mile short, so I left the truck and walked in quiet, boots soft on the pine needles. There was no moon, just a spill of stars so thick it looked like someone had punched holes in black velvet, and every one of those stars was reflected perfectly in the lake. The water was a mirror, cracked only where fish fed near the edges. I've seen it like that before, but never so still it hurt to look at. The Harlan cabin sat on a point, 3 sides open to water, built back when people thought lakefront meant progress. It had been condemned after a woman drowned there in '94. Story where she went for a midnight swim alone, got tangled in old fishing line or cramps, and never came up. They found her towel on the dock the next morning, still folded neat. After that, the owner stopped renting, and the 4 started taking the place back. Kudzu over the roof, poplars growing through the porch floor. But that night the windows were lit from inside, a sickly yellow flicker like candlelight or a dying bulb. I circled wide, staying in the trees. The glow pulsed, steady then dim, steady then dim, the way a heartbeat looks on a monitor. When I got close enough to see through the side window, the light went out. Just like that. 1 second the living room was washed in amber, the next it was black, and all I had was my own reflection staring back at me in the dirty glass. Only it wasn't quite my reflection. The face behind mine was a woman's, pale, mouth open like she was trying to scream through water. Her eyes were wide, pupils blown, and her hair floated around her head in slow motion the way hair does when you're under. I blinked hard, and she was gone. Just me left, breathing fog onto the pane. I should have radioed it in as possible trespass, waited for backup. Instead, I tried the door. It opened without a sound, like it had been waiting. Inside smelled of wet stone and something floral gone sour, the ghost of somebody's perfume clinging to the damp. The furniture was still there under sheets, shapes like bodies laid out for a viewing. My flashlight cut a tunnel through the dust, and every sheet I passed seemed to settle a fraction slower than it should have, as if something underneath had just shifted its weight. The bathroom was at the end of the hall. Door half open, mirror above the sink shattered into a spiderweb that hadn't been there the last time I checked the property. Each jagged shard held a piece of a picture. A woman's hand breaking the surface, fingers splayed. Another shard showed her face tilted up toward light that wasn't there. Another caught her mouth in a perfect O of surprise or suffocation. I leaned in, and the pieces rearranged themselves into my own face, fractured a dozen ways, except in one shard near the bottom my eyes were hers. Milky, desperate, fixed on something just behind me. I backed out fast and tripped over something soft. My light landed on a spiral notebook lying open on the floor, pages warped from damp. The handwriting was neat at first, then frantic, ink bleeding where water had gotten to it. August 12th, 1994. The lake is warmer than the air tonight. Feels like it wants me in it. August 13th. Woke up on the dock at 3 a.m., don't remember walking there. Feet wet. August 14th. Something touched my ankle when I was only waist deep. Thought it was a fish until it squeezed. August 15th. It's not fishing line. I checked. There's nothing down there but dark, and the dark as hands. The last entry was a single line scrawled across both pages. Pressure, so hard the paper tore. If you see me in the water, don't come closer. That's how it starts. I looked up, and the bathroom mirror had gone black. Not dark, black, like someone poured ink behind the cracks. My reflection was missing entirely. In its place, the woman stood underwater, hair drifting, arms reaching toward me through the glass. She opened her mouth, and a thin stream of bubbles escaped, rising slow as smoke. That's when the lake woke up. It started as a single ring spreading from the middle of the cove, perfect and wide, like something big had just rolled over beneath the surface. Then another ring closer, then a dozen, all rushing toward the cabin without wind to push them. The dockboards out back began to knock together, a hollow, patient sound. Splash. Pause. Splash. Closer each time. I bolted for the front door, boots skidding on the warped pine, and burst outside in time to see the water at the edge of the yard bulge upward, a smooth dome rising and falling like a lung breathing. I ran. The The path back to the truck felt 3 times longer than it had coming in. Every few steps I heard it behind me. Wet footfalls on gravel that shouldn't have been wet, the soft slap of something climbing out of the lake and following at the exact pace I set. I didn't look back. You learn that quick in these mountains. Whatever's behind you gains ground the second you give your eyes. I reached the truck, slammed the door, and fumbled the keys twice before the engine caught. As I spun tires in the gravel, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The lake had gone still again, starlight perfect and unbroken, except for one place near the dock where the surface showed a face staring up at me. Not in the water. On it, like the lake itself, had grown eyes. They were her eyes, wide and pleading, and for a heartbeat, I thought she was trying to warn me. Then the face sank, slow, leaving only ripples and the faint smell of pondweed inside the cab. I avoid that cove now. I rerouted the patrol schedule, told the new guys the road washes out every rain, anything to keep them away. But some nights when the heat, lightning flickers, and the lake goes mirror smooth, I still drive up there with the windows down. I park on the ridge and watch the water the way you watch a stove after you've turned the burner off, waiting to see if the flame's really out. Most times there's nothing, just stars and tree frogs and the low hum of summer. But every once in a while the surface breaks in that one spot, a single ring spreading wide and slow. And if I look too long, I catch a glimpse of movement under the reflection. Pale hands sliding just beneath the stars, reaching up toward a sky they'll never touch again. I keep the dead woman's diary in my glove box. The pages have dried and curled, but I can still read the last line clear as the night she wrote it. Sometimes when I'm parked up there on the ridge, the book shifts on its own, like someone's turning pages I can't see. And on the worst nights, when the air is heavy and there's no moon at all, I swear I feel cold fingers brush the back of my neck from the empty passenger seat. Patient, waiting for the night, I finally roll the window down and let the lake finish what it started. Because reflections don't lie. They just wait for the water to get still enough to show you what's really looking back. I've spent most of my adult life on or around water. Grew up fishing the New River with my granddaddy. Learned to read the mountains the way sailors read the sea. You get so you trust the surface, how it dimples when a base is rising, how it goes oily just before a storm. But there's one stretch of Cheat Lake, up in the narrow northern arm we call Devil's Elbow, where the water never tells the truth. Even on calm days, it looks thick, like it's holding something back. Folks who know it don't fish there after the sun drops behind the ridge. I used to laugh at them. Then came a night the lake reached up and tried to take me with it. It was late October, the kind of cold rain that feels personal, like the sky's mad at you specifically. I was finishing a 16-hour shift. Poachers had been running spotlights on the deer again, and I was bone-tired, ready to head home to a microwave supper and 8 hours of pretending I didn't hear the woods outside my trailer. Dispatch crackled just as I turned onto the county road. Weak distress call, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, coming from the old Morrison boathouse on the elbow. Signal faded in and out like the sender was underwater. Could have been a kid with a stolen marine radio. Could have been nothing, but SOS is SOS. I sighed, flipped the wipers to high, and pointed the truck north. The access road was more mud than gravel, and the headlights barely pushed 20 feet into the downpour. By the time I killed the engine at the gate, the rain was roaring on the cab roof like a freight train. I pulled on my slicker, clipped the mag light to my belt, and started the quarter-mile walk down to the lake. The path was a stream, ankle-deep and icy. Every step made a sucking sound, like the ground didn't want to let go. Pines crowded close, dripping cold needles down my collar. Somewhere an owl asked its question and didn't wait for an answer. The Morrison place showed up sudden, a sagging 2-story house with the paint long gone, and 50 yards below it the boathouse, half sunk into the bank. The tin roof glowed faintly under my light, throwing back the rain in silver sheets. The big sliding door hung open a foot, rocking in the wind. Inside, the water lapped black and restless against the pilings, higher than it had any right to be this late in the year. A single aluminum rowboat floated in the middle of the slip, tethered by a frayed line. It shouldn't have been there. We'd pulled all the boats the previous fall after the last drowning. I stepped onto the threshold, boots thudding hollow on the planks, and the rain noise dropped to a muffled hiss, like someone closed a door on the world. The air inside was warmer, thick with the smell of wet rust and old bait. Oars hung on the wall in their racks, wood warped and iron fittings bleeding orange onto the boards. I swept the light across the water. The boat bobbed gentle like someone had just climbed out. Water pooled in the bottom, an inch deep and perfectly still, reflecting my beam back at me. That's when I heard it, the softest splash directly beneath the walkway. Not a fish, too deliberate. I aimed the light down between the planks and saw nothing but black. Another splash, closer. Then the boat line creaked, tightening like weight had settled in the stern. I told myself it was current, a log rolling under the surface, anything with a name. I stepped forward to check the hull number, and that's when the hands came up. They broke the water without a ripple, two pale shapes sliding over the gunnel from underneath, reaching for me. I felt them before I saw them. Cold, impossibly cold, clamping around my wrists like iron left out in January. The grip was strong, practiced, the way a drowning man grabs the first solid thing he touches. My boots skidded on the wet boards as I was yanked forward, knees banging the edge. The mag light spun out of my hand and landed pointed down, throwing a cone of light straight into the water. For one heartbeat, I saw them clearly. Fingers too long, skin bloated and white, nails split and dark with lake mud. Then they let go as sudden as they'd taken hold, sinking back into the dark with a sound like a sigh. I stumbled backward, heart slamming so hard I tasted blood. The boat rocked hard, water sloshing over the sides, and for a second the surface boiled with pale movement, hands, arms, faces pressing up from below, too many to count. Then calm again, flat as port oil. I snatched the light off the floor and swung it across the shelves. There, wedged behind a stack of moldy life jackets, was the logbook we'd missed when we cleared the place. Leather cover soft as rot, pages swollen. I flipped it open with shaking fingers. Entry after entry, same story in different handwriting. June 72, took the John boat out at dusk. Felt something tug the oar. Thought it was weeds. Came back missing my watch and half my memories of the trip. September 81, my brother went under right in front of me. It's where I saw hands holding his ankles. When I reached for him, they grabbed me too. Let go when I screamed Jesus' name. Last entry, dated 3 weeks before I stood there, ink still dark. Storm coming. Heard them knocking under the boat all night. They're patient. They know we all come back to the water eventually. The rain on the tin roof chose that moment to double, drumming so loud it felt like the building was shaking. Thunder rolled down the hollow, close enough to rattle my teeth. And the pulling started again, only this time nothing touched me. It was inside my boots, a steady downward drag, like the floor itself had turned to current. My laces tightened. The boards creaked and bowed. Water began to seep up between the planks, black and smelling of deep places. I ran. The door slammed shut behind me, as if the wind changed its mind, and I hit it shoulder first, bursting out into the storm. Rain lashed sideways, stinging like birdshot. I made it 10 steps before the tugging came back harder, wrapping around my ankles, tried to drag me down into the mud. I kicked free and kept moving, sliding, crawling when I had to. Behind me, the boathouse door banged open and shut, a slow heartbeat in the dark. I reached the truck, flung myself inside, and locked the doors like that would help. Engine coughed, caught, headlights cutting 2 pale tunnels through the downpour. As I spun tires in the mud, I looked back. The boathouse door hung open. In the rectangle of darkness, something stood on the threshold, water streaming from its arms. It didn't have a face I could make out, just a suggestion of height and weight and patience. It raised one hand, slow, the way you wave goodbye to someone you know you'll see again. I floored out of there, fishtailing up the ridge until the lake was lost behind curtains of rain. When I finally stopped at the overlook to catch my breath, my wrists were ringed with bruises shaped like fingerprints, purple and perfect. They never quite faded. I pulled the files the next week. 6 confirmed drownings at Devil's Elbow since 1970, for more missing and presumed. Every body they did recover was tangled in monofilament or fishing line, mouths open, eyes wide like something had held them under until the fight went out. The ones they never found, the boats came back empty or ship neat, just like the story said. I stay away from that arm of the lake now. I rerouted every patrol, told the new rangers the road's impassable, which it pretty much is if you know what's waiting. But some nights, when the rain sets in hard and the wind comes off the water just right, I wake up with wet footprints on the trailer floor leading from the door to my bedside. They're always barefoot, always small like a child's or a woman's or something that used to be one or the other. And sometimes when the thunder walks the ridge like it's looking for a place to sit down, I feel the tugging again, gentle but insistent, wrapped around my ankles under the covers. Not trying to take me yet, just reminding me it's still there, still waiting. Because the lake keeps its own, and sooner or later, every hand that's ever reached down into that water gets reached for in return. I keep the truck keys on the nightstand now. Some nights, I sit up till dawn, listening to the rain on the roof, feeling the cold climb a little higher up my legs each time the thunder speaks. Because I know one of these storms I'll be too tired to fight it. One of these nights, I'll let the door stay unlocked, let the footprints walk all the way to the bed, let those cold fingers close around my wrists again. And when they pull, I won't pull back. I've always said the wind in these mountains is a liar. It'll carry a scent 10 miles just to fool a hound, or hush itself right before a storm so you think the worst is past. But sometimes it tells the truth, and that's when you wish it had stayed quiet. It was the last week of May, the kind of evening when the sun hangs low and red behind the ridges and the air smells like dogwood and creek water. I was finishing a breeding bird survey along the spine of Shaver's Fork, counting warblers and trying to ignore the ache in my knees. The trail I followed wasn't on any official map. It was an old logging trace that petered out near a cove locals call Whisper Bend. The lake there is small and deep, hemmed in by laurel, so thick you can't see water until you're standing on it. Most folks avoid the place. They say the wind gets trapped in that bowl and circles forever, repeating things it's heard. I've been hearing it all afternoon. A low murmur riding the breeze, too soft for words, just the suggestion of voices. I chalked it up to the blood in my ears and kept walking. The sun was bleeding out behind the western ridge when the cabin appeared, tucked so tight against the hillside, I almost walked past it. One story, cedar shingles gone silver, porch half collapsed under a blanket of kudzu. It wasn't on my property list. Somebody built it before the park boundary moved and never bothered to tear it down. The windows were filmed with decades of pollen, but the glass was whole, and the door still hung true on its hinges. Pretty little place, really like a picture from a calendar nobody ever turned the page on. The breeze shifted as I stepped onto the porch, coming off the lake cool and steady, carrying that same murmur, only clearer now. Not birds, not insects, people talking low and urgent, the way you speak when you don't want to wake something sleeping. I circled the cabin slow. Back door locked, windows latched from inside. The curtains, faded calico printed with tiny blue flowers, twitched once, as if a hand had brushed them, then settled. I told myself it was the draft, but the hair on my arms lifted all the same. Protocol said mark the location, report an unauthorized structure, and leave it for the maintenance crew. Curiosity said something else. I worked a putty knife under the side window, felt the old latch give with a sigh, and climbed through. Inside, time had stopped polite. Dust floated in the slanted light like slow snow. A rocker sat by the cold fireplace, cushions still holding the shape of a body. Dishes in the drainer, 2 plates, 2 cups, a child's plastic cup with a faded dinosaur. Everything covered in the same fine gray, but arranged like the owners had stepped out for a walk and never came back. The air was still, almost reverent. Then I saw the reel-to-reel recorder on the kitchen table, an old woolen sack, the kind my granddad used to tape church services. The reels were turning, slow and steady, tape hissing soft. Someone had left it running. I pressed play before I could talk myself out of it. At first it was just wind, the hollow moan you get when a microphone sits outside too long. Then voices layered in, faint, overlapping. A man, winds shifting again, coming straight down the ridge. A woman, younger, We can still make the far shore if we leave now. A child couldn't have been more than 8. Mama, it's getting dark in the water. Then static, a burst like a scream cut off, and coordinates repeated slow and clear. 38.912, negative 79.834. Middle of the lake. Over and over, like a broken prayer. I stepped back outside to breathe, and the breeze hit me full in the face, warm now, carrying the same voices, only stronger, closer, threaded through the trees. My name rode the tail end of it, soft as a question. Ellis. I froze. The wind had never known my name before. Back inside, I rewound the tape and played it again. Same voices, same panic. But this time when the child spoke, I heard my own daughter's pitch, though she's been living in Charlotte for 6 years and hasn't set foot in these mountains since her mama's funeral. My hand went to the stop button and hovered. The voices kept going, pleading now, telling me to hurry, telling me the water was rising inside the boat, telling me they could see the cabin lights from out there, and why wouldn't someone come? The curtains moved again, all of them at once, though the windows were shut tight. I felt breath on the back of my neck, cold as creek stone, and the smell of lake water filled the room, though we were 50 yards from shore. I ejected the tape, stuffed it in my pocket, and headed for the door. The wind outside had picked up hard, whipping the treetops into a roar. Every gust carried fragments, names, dates, snatches of prayer. My name again, clearer, almost laughing now like they were close enough to see me running. I took the trail at a jog, flashlight bobbing, laurel branches slapping my face. The whispers stayed with me, circling, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, sometimes right at my ear. The path twisted more than I remembered. The same crooked hemlock showed up 3 times like the mountain was folding in on itself. When I finally burst out at the truck, my shirt was torn and my hand were bleeding from briars I didn't recall fighting through. I drove straight to the ranger station and pulled every file on Whisperband. August 17th, 1978. Family of 4, father, mother, 2 children, left the public ramp at dusk for an evening cruise on a 14-foot John boat. Weather report was clear, but a microburst came down off the ridge without warning. Winds clocked at 60 on the far shore. Boat capsized. One body recovered 2 days later, tangled in a trot line. The other 3 never found. Their last radio transmission, weak and broken, gave those exact coordinates and ended with the little girl asking if the people in the cabin could see their lights. I listened to the tape again that night in the station, doors locked, coffee gone cold. Same voices, same pleas. Only now there was a new sound underneath, soft and steady, breathing. Not from the speakers, from the room. When I turned the volume down, it got louder. When I unplugged the machine, it didn't stop. I destroyed the tape the next morning, snapped it into pieces, and burned the scraps in the coffee can we use for cigarette butts. Didn't help. The wind still finds me. On evenings when the dogwoods bloom and the air turns warm and restless, it comes down off the ridge, carrying conversation I was never meant to hear. Sometimes it's just fragments. A woman singing a hymn I recognize from childhood, a man laughing like he's won something. Sometimes it's clearer, close enough I can pick out individual words. Hurry, cold, deeper, Ellis. I moved to a trailer on the eastern side of the county, far from any lake. But the wind doesn't care about county lines. It slips through the cracks around the windows, circles the room once, and settles like a hand on my shoulder. I keep the radio on now, volume low, anything to drown it out. Most nights it works. Some nights the stations fade to static and the voices come through anyway, patient as ever, asking why I left the light on if I wasn't coming to help. Last week a hiker found the cabin again, left a note in the trail register, heard people calling from the water at dusk, thought they were kids playing a prank until I heard my own name. I tore the page out before anyone else saw it. The wind is picking up outside as I write this. It started early this year. I can hear them tuning up in the trees, practicing the shape of my name like they're getting ready for something. I keep the windows closed and the curtains drawn, but the glass still fogs sometimes on the inside, slow handprints appearing and fading. And every time the breeze shifts just right, I smell lake water, cold and deep, waiting. They say if you answer the wind in Whisper Bend, It learns your voice and never forgets. I never answered. Not out loud. But I think about it every night when the whispering starts, about walking back down that trail with a lantern and a boat, and finally giving them whatever it is they've been trying to ask for all these years. Some nights I'm afraid I already have. I've never trusted still water in winter. Rivers keep moving even under ice, muttering to themselves like old men who can't let go of an argument. But a lake that's been dammed and raised just sits there, thick and patient, waiting for the thaw to remember what it took. Up in the Cranberry backcountry, there's a finger of water we call Dead Man's Bathtub, where the TVA flooded 3 hollows in the 50s and never bothered to move the houses first. Most of the roofs are gone now, chimneys snapped off like broken teeth, but a few structures still stand, half swallowed, leaning farther every spring. Locals say on the coldest nights, you can see lantern light moving behind windows that are 20 feet under. I always figure it was methane or moonshine talking. Then February came, and the lake decided to prove me wrong. We'd had a hard freeze for 2 weeks straight, the kind that locks the world in glass. Snow was drifted chest-high in the cuts, and every creek hung silent in silver ropes of ice. I was checking closed roads for ice fishermen too dumb to read signs when a call came from a logger working the ridge above the bathtub. Steady yellow light glowing from the old Kessler place, the one that's been underwater since '58. He swore it pulsed like somebody walking room to room with a lantern. I told him it was probably reflection off the ice, but I went anyway. You don't leave a light burning in a drowned house without knowing why. The access track was buried, so I left the truck at the gate and snowshoed in. The forest was dead quiet. No wind, no birds, just my poles squeaking and the soft crunch of powder giving way. The moon was a thin blade overhead, bright enough that the snow threw it back in my eyes. When I broke out on the ridge above the lake, the sight stopped me cold. The reservoir was frozen solid, a dull white plain stretching between black walls of spruce, and there, maybe 200 yards out, a faint amber glow rose through the ice like someone had buried a coal deep, and it was still trying to burn. It moved slow, back and forth, following the outline of a house only the oldest maps remember. I followed the ridge until I stood directly above the Kessler place. From there I could see the roof peak jutting a foot above the surface, shingles long rotted away, ridgepole sagging like a broken spine. The glow came from below, steady, the color of coal oil lanterns my granddaddy used before the power lines came. It slid along what would have been the hallway, paused at the front door, then drifted back, patient as a watchman. I told myself it was a pocket of swamp gas trapped under the ice, or a chemical drum somebody dumped 50 years ago, finally eating through its skin. But I've seen swamp gas. It dances blue and cold. This light was warm, and it knew where the walls were. I should have marked coordinates and come back with a team at first light. Instead, I found the old footpath that switchbacks down to the water's edge and started down. The closer I got, the more the house revealed itself. Front porch collapsed into the lake, windows staring up blind and black. The whole structure tilted 15 degrees like it was trying to crawl deeper. A single set of boot prints, mine, led to the edge and stopped. The ice was thick enough to bear a truck, but I stepped careful anyway. Every footfall boomed under me, a dull thud that carried too far. The glow steadied when I reached the porch, brightened, like whoever carried it had heard me coming. I knelt and brushed snow from the ice. 6 inches down, the front door stood open, swaying gentle in a current that shouldn't exist under a frozen lake. The lantern hung just inside the threshold, swinging from a nail in a beam, casting gold ripples across wallpaper that peeled in slow motion. A man stood beneath it, tall, stooped, wearing the same wool coat and felt hat men wore when I was a boy. He didn't look up. He just turned and walked deeper into the house, lantern swaying, lights sliding along baseboards that hadn't seen air in 65 years. I don't know why I did it. Maybe because the cold had numbed the part of my brain that knows better. I took the folding knife from my belt, chipped a breathing hole, and went in. The water was so cold it felt hot, a white burn that stole my breath and locked my chest. I kicked down hard, following the lantern's glow. 10 feet, 15, the pressure building in my ears. The house opened beneath me like a dollhouse cutaway. Living room with furniture still arranged around a cold hearth, kitchen table set for supper, plates floating edge up like pale fish. The man with the lantern walked ahead, steady, never looking back. His boots didn't stir the silt. He moved like memory itself. I followed him into what used to be the downstairs hall. Doorways opened on either side, and in each room people moved in slow loops. A woman rocking an empty cradle, two little girls chasing each other around a rug that lifted and settled like breath, an old man sitting at a desk writing the same line over and over in a ledger that never filled. None of them noticed me. Their eyes were open but filmed, the color of spoiled milk. Bubbles leaked from their mouths in perfect spheres, rising slow toward the ceiling that used to be sky. The lantern bearer stopped at the far end and turned. For the first time I saw his face, my granddaddy's face. Only younger, the way he looked in pictures before the mine took his lungs. He lifted the lantern higher, and the light showed me what I'd been swimming through. Dozens of them, maybe 50, walking the same paths they'd walked the night the dam broke and the valley filled in a single hour. They hadn't drowned so much as been paused, caught mid-step while the water rose around them. The lantern was their anchor, the only warm thing left in a world gone cold. He pointed to a stairwell leading up into darkness, then to me, then back to the stairs. A question or an invitation. My lungs were starting to claw for air. I shook my head. He nodded once, sad, like he'd expected it, and turned away. The lantern dimmed. I kicked for the surface, broke through the hole, gasping and retching, ice water streaming from my coat. Behind me, the glow winked out. I crawled onto the porch on hands and knees, coughing up lake and 60-year-old air. When I could breathe again, I looked back. The hole was already skinning over with new ice, but for a second, I saw the lantern flare once more, deep down, moving toward the stairs I'd refused. I made it to shore, half frozen, boots full of water that turned to slush before I reached the truck. In the glove box, I found the photo album I'd grabbed from the mantel without remembering, leather cover soft as lung tissue, pages swollen but intact. Inside, the Kessler family and half the hollow posed on that same porch the summer before the flood. Granddaddy stood in the back row, 25 years old, holding the same lantern that had just guided me through their endless house. I never reported what I saw. Wrote it up as clear ice and logger's imagination. Barricaded the road with deadfalls and warning signs nobody heeds. But every winter when the lake freezes thick and the nights go long and quiet, I snowshoe back to the ridge. Most times the ice is dark and empty. Some nights, though, only the coldest, when the stars hang low enough to touch, the lantern comes back. It moves the same route, patient, waiting for someone willing to follow it all the way up those stairs to whatever's left at the top. I keep the album on my kitchen table now. The faces never change, but the pages get damper every year, like the lake is still rising one slow photograph at a time. And when the wind shifts just right and the snow starts to fall sideways, I swear I hear footsteps inside my walls, soft, measured, walking a hallway that isn't there, pausing outside my bedroom door the way you pause when you're listening for someone to wake up and let you in. I leave the porch light burning all winter now. Not for me, for them. Because one of these nights the ice will be thick enough and the cold quiet enough, and I'll hear that lantern swinging closer under the floorboards. And when Granddaddy knocks, soft, the way he used to knock when he came home from the mines and didn't want to wake the house, I don't know if I'll have the strength to keep pretending I'm not home. Some debts don't die when the water closes over. Some lights keep burning long after the oil should be gone. And out here, where the lake is always hungry for what it missed the first time, a promise to come back is the same as a promise to stay.